gospel for this Sunday comes to us from John, the 15th chapter. Go ahead, Thomas. Oh, sorry, bud. Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." This is the word of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. And I'd like to invite the children forward. I'd like to invite the kids forward. Do you guys want to... Yeah. We can go outside real quick first if you want to see something. You want to go outside for just a second before we read this? No? Great. Yes, I like that answer, Ellie. Okay, well, why don't we do this first, and then we'll go outside. Just a second, it's just right outside the door. This book is called The Lost Words. If you've ever seen this before, it's a beautiful book of great illustrations. It's become sort of a sensation. You can even get children's like little matching cards to play a game with it. The premise of this book is that there are words that used to be a part of our childhood, typically words that describe the natural world that are endangered because our kids don't spend enough time outside anymore, and they don't spend enough time in nature glorifying in that. And it's a book of poems. I want to read you one poem here that is about a kind of vine called ivy. Very short poem. Ivy. I am ivy, a real high flyer. Via bark and stone I scale tree and spire. You call me ground cover, I say sky wire. And Thomas, those three letters that begin every stanza?
It's ivy.
Ivy, it's an acrostic. That's fun. All of the poems are acrostics like that. Okay, now come with me, and I'm going to see if you guys think you can find this plant right outside the church. Let's do it, huh? That's right. Not the big door, actually the little door down here. Okay. This is the children's sermon. I like to describe what's like. Here. See any ivy out here? Anyone look for this kind of... That's right, good job, Lee. Good. Okay, let's... Is it... It's right... Yeah, there is some moss there. See that? It's growing on our stairs. Great. Moss for your art and science club. So as you can see from this, it's not hard for us to find, even if we just go a little bit outside the church. Everyone still coming, including Ellie, making sure that... You guys all coming in? Bell, you're with us too? Yeah, I know. Shepherd the children. So it's not that hard for us to find ivy if we go looking for it. And you know what? There's lots of other images in the Bible that are like that, where Jesus will say something about grain. And you can be looking around and say, oh my gosh, look, a wheat field. That reminds me of that Bible passage. I'm giving you guys a homework assignment this week. I want you to take a walk outside. Get out into nature. And I want you to take a parent or somebody who you like, maybe a grandparent, aunt, uncle, somebody who takes you on these sort of things. And I want you to look for something you read about in the Bible. Maybe it will be a vine. And then you can talk a little bit about that image. Or maybe it'll be a chicken, because there's an image of God as a mother hen who loves her flock so much. Or maybe you'll actually see a sheep. That's what we talked about last week, right? It is important for me that you guys have a chance to see what the Bible is talking about and know it by actually seeing the image. Because otherwise, we might not know what it means to be all these different images. But there's one that I bet you do get, and it's one that we talk about and we sing about every week, which is to be a kid, to be a child of God. That one I bet you can get. So you got your homework assignment? Now let's sing our song together. You guys ready? If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am, if anybody asks you who I am, tell them I'm a child of God. Would you join me in prayer? O Lord, may the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. In the 1800s in France, 80% of the wine-growing grapes were wiped out over the course of 5 years. A pest imported from America, whoopsie daisies, called Phlox infected the plant, and it proved absolutely devastating to the crops. Indeed, so much this was a natural occurrence, but it was a disaster in the world of the wine-growing region. And there was a bounty put out by the French government on anyone who could identify what was going on there, and you'd get like $1 billion in today's money for solving this problem. So some scientists did pretty quickly figure out what it was, this Phloxera. They determined that it was an insect. Phloxera it's got to be one of the most fascinating insects I think I've ever read about in my life. It has so many different forms. The form that it typically finds is as a flying bug, and that flying bug lands on a new patch of grapes. Pretty quickly, it loses its wings and develops into a male and a female form. The male and female form, both of which have no digestive tract. They don't have anything that they eat or whatever. Instead, their jobs do two things, which is to inject a poison into the roots of the tree, of the vine, and we don't know why they do this exactly, but it might be something that comes later in their life cycle that's like a preparatory stage, and they mate. And when the male and the female mate, they lay exactly one egg, and then that is it. Then they're dead, because they don't have any digestive tract, right? They have nothing to do but die. That one egg produces an asexual offspring that instead of living up in the leaves, drops down to the roots, where then it starts to recreate itself asexually. It splits almost like a bacteria or a virus or something. They do have a digestive system, and we're presuming anyway that poison that the first insects put in the root system helped to digest it a little bit so that these guys could begin to eat. Now, in Europe, this was catastrophic, and there was no solution. Actually, to this very day, there is no solution that cures the phlox. All that we can do is live with it. And the solution that was found, like many problems, right? They come from America, but we also solve them. Like we can be somewhat proud of that. Was to graft American rootstock. So what we would do is we would send over the rootstock from grapes that would grow here, and they weren't necessarily grapes that you would grow like good wine on, but they were hardy and they were strong. They were, big Concord grapes. We would plant those in the ground, and then somebody would have to come through and take all of these old vines and graft them on, meaning you would strip a little bit of the bark, and you'd strip a little bit of the other bark, and you'd put them together, and you'd bind them up. And then it would become one plant again with resistance to the phlox. One of the images that we get for how we belong to Christ is through a grafting. That we are a part of this vine because the rootstock of Christ is hardy. It can handle the phlox. It can handle the sins that we bring in. In my more pessimistic feelings about humankind, I tend to think to myself that Jesus may have been making a tremendous mistake by grafting me into the vine, and grafting any of us into the vine. I think to myself, boy, we're a big problem. Human beings are one big old problem, and I don't know that it's worth it that we got grafted in. In fact, when you think about it, one of the ways that it's super interesting that scientists are doing this these days, one of the interesting ways that people have sought to describe human behavior is in epidemiological terms, as if human beings could be best described as a disease. And they've had some real effective modeling using this. They can determine where gun violence is going to happen based on using computer simulations that would have been otherwise for like a virulent virus. They can determine where global population centers are going to grow based on cultures that you could build in a lab. This is not a great message for those of you who might have a high view of humankind that places us very high in the animal kingdom, well above nature in all respects, and somehow elevated. But in fact, it appears that our behavior is diseased, that this is who we are. Now, I want to say the message that we get from Jesus is not that. And if you are reading in today's passage, I want you to know that in the debate, this is a very old Christian debate between whether human beings are basically good or basically bad, whether we are basically all sin and mess up, or whether there is something created and wonderful and beautiful to who we are. The Lutheran answer is yes to both. We are both of those things fully and simultaneously, saint and sinner at exactly the same time. We are that true branch that was designed to bear fruit, to be planted in a verdant garden, and the thing that is you is something that God intended all along to be a part of this beautiful vine. You're supposed to be here bearing fruit. And yeah, you're going to come to it as an infection too. I can't extricate that from you. And those of you who have known what it has been like to be hurt by yourself or others, it would be an insult if I were to deny that, if I were to deny that sin is at work in the world. But here again, the good news, this is part one of my sermon, the good news is that through Christ and through the rootstock that is Christ, through the branch that is him, he can handle it. He was the only one who could handle it, and did. He took on our sin, and through the robustness of who he is, lived. So here's the second question, second part of my sermon. If you were paying attention in our passage today, a lot of it is about bearing fruit, right? Now that we know that we are a part of this vine and that we have a mission, we're told that we have to bear it abundantly. And yet we don't. At least not in the way that I believe God intended for us to do. And oftentimes there's this question about like, oh, why is that? Human beings sure are a mystery. I'll tell you this, if we could figure out phylloxera, right? If we could figure out an insect whose life cycle is so incredibly confusing and weird, all because it's very, very, very important that we have a glass of wine. Okay, if we put that much emphasis into this, then I think that we could probably figure out human beings too, if we were to really commit to that task. And I believe actually that we have. So this question of why can human nature be understood in epidemiological terms, I think is best answered by a guy named Lacan. So Lacan came up with a theory. He's a psychologist who's, you got Freud and then you got Jung. Lacan, I think, is one of the next big names in there. But he disagrees from a lot of his contemporaries when they might say, the important part of psychology is to figure out how weirdos are different than the normal people, right? If that's the task of psychology, Lacan says, what if we're all weirdos? What if being normal is pretty weird, actually? And he comes up with a theory that I think makes a lot of sense called the death drive. So follow me on this for just a second, and then we'll get to practical examples that will make this very clear. He talks about desire. So to desire something is also to carry with it annihilation. How so? Because when we desire something, when we want something, when it is fulfilled, boom, it's done. So it carries with it its own annihilation. To want something and then to have it happen is the end of that want. Desire satisfies desire, it's done. However, what if human beings found a way to eternalize desire, so desire never went away? Or another way of putting it, what if we desired desire itself? Desire, desiring desire. It would turn from what we would call desire into drive. And the problem with drive is that it can never be satisfied. So to want something can be concluded. To have a drive for something is eternal and will go on forever. As in most things, South Park has the best explanation for this. A starving African child is adopted by Cartman's family, and Cartman is so excited to show him our culture. He takes him to Outback Steakhouse and says, "This is the appetizer menu. This is food we eat to make ourselves more hungry." Once you see signs of this, it's all around you, right? Companies don't even advertise fulfillment anymore. They advertise the addiction. They say, you're going to love this so much, you're going to be unable to tear yourself away from it. You're going to appreciate this thing so much, you're going to become in a drive cycle where you're going to want more and more. It's endless. And the problem with the death drive like this is that it ignores what this does to the planet. It ignores what it does to our souls. It ignores the world that we live in and leaves us with a sense that we can never, ever, ever be done. This is the essence of a fruit that is foul. This is a fruit that is pointless. This is the fruit that does not satisfy by its very nature. It cannot satisfy. All that it has to give us is hunger. And I think it's so interesting how this is something that, even ancient peoples, I'm sure, delved into this, but this has become ubiquitous in our culture today. I think it's one of the best explainers for the age that we live in, is in this age of perpetual hunger. And it's also why the message that we have to give to the world is sometimes so ill-received, isn't it? And when's the last time you talked to somebody about heaven and they're like, oh yeah, I can't wait for the kingdom of heaven, for heaven on earth, for all these things. And their answer is, I don't know. Sounds boring. Doesn't sound like anything that we are used to in our culture, right? What we are used to is an endless drive for more, for more. But what if we had a word to speak to the world that was fulfillment, that was true satisfaction, that was the end of that drive and the knowledge of peace and the end of our fractions and the knowledge of love, that we were made one again in this vine. Our job is to preach that to the world. And when it means that you are going to bear fruit to the world, and abundant fruit, and fruit that is good, it's not the message you may have been told before, which is go out and be busy. In fact, it's the complete opposite of go out and be busy. It's go out and be meaningful, be fulfilling. Talk about these things. Offer it to people who are in your life. Know that it's going to be countercultural. This is going to run up against what we are used to. But this is for what you have been created. And when you live into it, when you become that branch that bears much fruit, you will also be fulfilled. You will be doing what God has always intended you to do. Even if you got the Phlox, folks, this is our mission, and you are prepared for it. Amen.